Well, there's compelling evidence that the second half of your life and mine could be the very best season of our lives, not just in terms of joy and balance and fulfillment, but actually the most impactful, the most leveraged, the most productive season of our life. You know, after many years now of serving people in midlife transition, effective men and women who've been leaders all their life, and they reach a point in midlife and look up from their desk and wonder, is there more to life than this? I want to share with you some of the things that we've been learning. And when you combine your expertise and the wisdom you've been gaining through all these years in your first half, the honing of your strengths, with some passion that you have in your heart to make a difference in this world, your second half of life will blossom into something so beautiful that it trumps the slow drift to retirement, that it blows away the idea of packing up our bags and moving to Leisureville. Or like Billy Crystal said in the movie City Slickers, spending the rest of our life RVing around the country in pursuit of the ultimate soft yogurt. Over these years, I've had the privilege of spending 10 or 11,000 clinical hours coaching successful men and women that want to do a midlife renewal. They come to the Halftime Institute looking for process and peers and ideas that can help them on that journey. I want to share with you some of our learning. How do you go through midlife renewal? What are the implications for you if you happen to be in your first half of life? What are your implications if you find yourself in your second half? And then I want to share a couple of interesting new learnings that frankly have surprised me. And one of those is that your second half can actually be more productive than your first half. Now, that kind of struck me as odd, but there's strong evidence of that. The second is that people deep into their second half, deep into a rich and fulfilling second half, come to value rich, intimate relationships more than just accomplishment. But those deep relationships were often squeezed out in the first half of their life. Now, I've had a unique window of visibility into this midlife renewal process for two reasons. First of all, because I went on this journey in my own life, and secondly, because I have had this privilege of spending 10 or 11,000 hours working with people, teaching, coaching, and helping them think through the complex issues of their life. And this little classic sigmoid curve represents what you and I will go through, what the people I have the privilege of serving go through, what I went through in my life. And you might ask yourself the question, why do people today have two lives? I mean, what's up with that? Well, probably four reasons why you and I have two lives today. First is longevity. Do you know the average life expectancy in America just 100 years ago, which is a relatively short season in human history, was 47 or 48? And when you got to 47 or 48, you were pretty worn out. Maybe you'd been a farmer or worked in a factory. You might have had 6 children. Maybe 2 of them passed away in infant mortality. You had a toothache or something, or some kind of ache or pain that you and I wouldn't tolerate for very long. And that was the end of your life. There was no second half. A second reason is that when you've done something for 25 or 30 years, most people are ready for change. Not to change who they are at the core or change their strengths, but to change how they deploy their expertise and their skills and the stress level of what they want to do in the next season. The third reason that people today have two lives is that this is the healthiest, best educated generation to ever reach midlife. And as a result, because we're knowledge workers, we can make a contribution in our second half. One of the great mentors to the Halftime Institute was a guy named Peter Drucker, who is known as the father of modern management theory. He died 10 years ago, yesterday. He died 10 years ago yesterday. And late in life, he said, people now have two lives, and they're over-prepared for life one, and they're under-prepared for life two, and there's no university for the second half of life. And then the fourth reason why you and I have a second life is what I call the leisure myth. You know, for 75 years as a culture, we've been experimenting with retirement. Some people have found it rewarding. Many, if not most, find it not so rewarding. They don't like the idea that our second half is we've lost our voice or our platform. We don't like the idea that our best years are behind us. And I certainly don't want to squander all the wisdom that I've garnered along the way in these next 30 years when I could make perhaps my most meaningful contribution. Now, this represents what I went through, and you likely will, whether you anticipate it or not. I came out of McGill University in Montreal, got a wonderful education, and then I got my butt kicked around corporate America for a couple of years before I became teachable. And I worked at a bank. Then I started developing real estate. I got married to Linda 34 years ago when she was 12. Just kidding. We started having kids and accumulating stuff and junk, more things than we'll ever need. Now, A is an inflection point. It's a point where you look up from your desk and you start to think, is this all there is? Is there anything? Is this it? And it happens for different reasons. Sometimes the next deal closing doesn't mean that much to you. Maybe a friend from high school dies at 50 and you wonder, wow, how many years do I have left? Maybe you go to the doctor and get a bad health report, or a divorce, or you have a big liquidity event and sell a company, or you get downsized from corporate America, or your youngest little girl goes off to college, and you tuck her into her dorm room, and she walks you to your car, and she gives you a big hug and a kiss, and then she turns and she walks away. You got the rest of your life. And that will come quicker, if you're in your first half, that will come upon you quicker than you can imagine. And so B is a classic midlife crisis, perhaps. It's when you drive your first half dream too long and too hard, it always turns over on itself. And so you and I have this privilege of a renewal. This is a second half of life revolution. It's an opportunity to take everything that you have and redeploy it in parallel with what you've been doing and find more meaning and purpose and impact in the second half of life. And when you see it, it is a beautiful thing to behold. Tana Green first came to the Halftime Institute when she was in her 50s, and she was sharing her story with a cohort group, and she told us that when she was 16, she got pregnant and she got married, and for 4 years she was beaten up. And when she turned 20, she mustered the courage to break free from that, and she decided she'd never depend on someone else. She would own her own home at 26, and she would own her own company at 30. And at the time I met Tana, she was in her 50s, and she owned a company and with 2,500 employees. And she was there because she was looking for what's next. And her colleague said to her, Tana, do you think you could use the pain of your past to provide a purpose and passion for the future? And so she took one simple step. She wrote an article in the local city magazine where she lives on her story of domestic violence and freedom. And she was checking out at the cashier at the grocery store, and the lady checking her out said, I know who you are. You're Tana Green. And Tana said, well, how do you know me? And she said, you wrote that article. And I tore it out, and I gave it to my friend, and it gave her the courage to break free from 20 years of being beaten up. So Tana grabbed her bags and, tears in her eyes, and went to her car and just sat there. And she told me, she thought, could it be that I could use those years of pain to make a meaningful contribution in other people's lives using this platform and these skills now that I've been given? And that's what she's doing. She's the chairwoman of the Domestic Violence Center in her city. She's written a book about it. She now has 3,500 or 4,000 employees, and she knows there's statistically a number of them that are experiencing domestic violence, and so she's speaking in hope and joy and possibility and encouragement into their lives. And along the way, sure enough, those relationships are meaning more to her than anything in her first half. Tony Fisher came to a talk just like this and came up to me afterwards and asked if we could have coffee, and we sat, and he said, I'm 60, I have 5 or 6 car dealerships, and after listening to that and looking at that renewal curve, I need to just sell these dealerships and go do something meaningful with my life, which is a little red flag for me now, because I know very often your passion and your calling is hidden in plain view. So I said, Tony, let's just start talking about it. Who are you? What do you care about? What is your mission and calling in life before you sell your... Well, sure enough, he discovered his calling was use his influence and his leadership skills to affect the lives of people who are suffering in Durham, North Carolina. That's where he's always lived. So he just did one simple thing. Well, first he started to figure out what would he need, and his peers around him said, Tony, you need a platform, you need cash flow, You need influence in the community. You need people around you who can do some of the legwork. And they said, doesn't that sound remarkably like the dealerships you already have? So Tony didn't sell his dealerships. He just started something called We Care. We care about the 400 employees or whatever that are working with us. And we care, he drew a circle around each of the dealerships, 3 miles around. He said, we're going to get to know all the human suffering in these 3-mile areas, who's doing a good job addressing it, and we're going to be part of that team. And again, he's having the time of his life in the second half. Edgar Sandoval was born in Mexico. They lived in poverty. When he was 11, his sister was 13. His parents disappeared. They made their way into the U.S. with $50 in one pocket and passports in the other. He's a smart brain that he was given, and he went to, got a Wharton MBA. He went to Procter & Gamble, and when I met him, he was the head of feminine products for Procter & Gamble worldwide. In fact, he did that little video, #LikeAGirl, which became their Super Bowl ad. It was one of his first forays into using his platform. And his calling, it turns out, is to use my marketing skills and global leadership experience and my experience in poverty to touch boys and girls who are dying or living without hope. And today, he's the Chief Operating Officer for World Vision. And he sent me a little note that I want to just share with you briefly here. And I brought to read a quick excerpt for you. Dear Lord, I could have never imagined when I arrived in the U.S. as a teenager, alone and unable to speak English, with $50 in one pocket and my passport in the other pocket, that one day I would be retiring as a vice president of a Fortune 50 company, running the marketing operations for the 2 largest product lines in our global portfolio. But I'm even more excited today to be starting my new job as the Chief Operating Officer for World Vision. If retiring from the world's largest consumer packaged goods company was not in my plans when I arrived in this country 3 decades ago, I can assure you that joining a national nonprofit global relief organization that touches 70 million people's lives each year in a quest to end poverty, fight hunger, and transform lives wasn't in my plans even 4 months ago. That said, today I can tell you with 100% conviction and even more joy, this is exactly what Liza and I want to do. At the bottom line, we feel this is God's call on this next season of our life. Now, each of those 3 people, they did 3 things, 3 very simple things. They got clear, they got free, and they got going. They got clear on who they are and their strengths and their passion and their calling. They got free from the things that are holding them back and cluttering up their life, the obligations and the things they own and the commitments they've made for their time, and they got started into what they're doing. Now, I want to just share these 2 learnings and then look at some implications today. The first learning was that these people can make the biggest contribution in their second half. And I think there are 3 reasons why that can happen. First of all, when you get to the midpoint in your life, you've spent all these years honing your skills. Bill Gates said recently in an interview that the reason he can make the contribution he's making in the medical treatment of people around the world is because of all the years he spent at Microsoft honing his leadership skills. And if you're in your first half of life, let me just leave you with a few thoughts about implications. My encouragement to you is that instead of looking at the first half of your life as a quest for affluence so that you can retire as soon as you possibly can, I would encourage you to forget about the idea of retirement and look at the first half of your life as a wonderful opportunity to hone the skills and the people skills and the wisdom and the expertise that you need that might make the most meaningful contribution in your second half. The second reason that you and I can make our biggest contribution in the second half is because wisdom. Along the way, you make decisions that are bad decisions and you learn from them. I'm a much wiser real estate developer today than I was when I first started in my 20s. And so you have the privilege to bring that into your second half. And the third component is influence. Over the years, you've built trust and a network, and people call you back. And lo and behold, now in this next season, you can make the biggest contribution of your lifetime. So implications, I think, for you and I are that use the first half of your life as a wonderful preparation. And then if you're in your second half, I encourage you to take the time to get clear, get free, and get going. Now, the second learning was that people deep into their second half come to value deep, intimate relationships more than simply more accomplishment. But they tell me, day after day, they tell me that unfortunately those got squeezed out of life in their first half. So my encouragement to you is don't trade what's priceless for something that's merely valuable. My mentor once asked me to write down a list of all the things I owned that were really valuable. And I made a list. It had my buildings and all kinds of stuff and junk on it. And then he said, now make a list of the things you have that are priceless. It was a much shorter list. And then he said, write down how you're protecting them. And lo and behold, all the valuable things were well protected. And the priceless things in my life were largely unprotected. Trading what's priceless in your life in the first half for what is merely valuable is never a good deal. So I encourage you to take the time to get clear, get free, and get going. And the second half of your life could be the greatest adventure of all. But take those you love with you on the journey. Thank you.